I am thrilled to announce that tonight's video has been graciously sponsored by Skillshare. This incredible platform offers a wealth of online classes taught by experts on almost everything. Now is the best time to brush up on an old skill or learn something new. With classes from kickboxing to craft, there's something for everyone. I personally have been improving my poi from Ben Drexler and highly recommend it if you want to learn flow arts. The first 1,000 of my subscribers to click the link in the description will get 30% off an annual premium membership, so you can explore your creativity. Even if you already have a free trial of Skillshare, you can still take advantage of this offer to get the full year of unlimited learning and creative exploration. So make the most of it. Link in the description. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was 6, my babysitter was this nice middle-aged lady and her equally nice husband. My twin brother and I were always at their house in the summer and hung out with the couple's 2 grandkids, another boy and girl sibling set of similar ages. This was literally my happy place. This lady had the best movie collection for a 6-year-old. It's where I saw The Last Unicorn for the first time, as well as The Little Mermaid, The Great Mouse Detective, The First Land Before Time, and The Brave Little Toaster. And her husband was a phenomenal cook by a kid's standard. Every day was chicken nuggets and pizza day. They had kid-size 4-wheelers, a pool, a huge kids' playhouse, and a jungle gym set up in the backyard. And they put on the best 4th of July show in the county for years. 6-year-old me was the happiest girl on the freaking planet, and they were some of the wealthiest people in the area too. Neither of them worked, so I had no idea where their money came from, but I didn't care. One day midsummer, the 2 boys were being typical boys, and the little girl and I thought they were being mean. In reality, the boys wanted to play war or something, and the girls wanted to play weddings, or something similar. She and I were sad, and we refused to play with the boys. Instead, we decided to pick flowers that grew at the edge of the forest. We thought it was baby's breath, but it was really just poison hemlock. Seriously. Kids, right? So we're walking along the edge of this dense forest in the middle of banjo country in southern Ohio. This was in 1990, so we weren't worried about stranger danger because we were just so far out into the country. The adults did worry about animals from time to time because the next county over had bears and mountain lions, but us 6-year-olds were fearless. We ended up walking on the neighbor's property, picking these flowers when we found a break in the tree line. It was an old, well-worn path leading into the woods. For whatever reason, i.e. we were dumb, she and I decided to ditch our flowers and take the path into the woods and see what it led to. The path itself was unremarkable, well-worn but unmaintained, as there were tree roots growing up through the path in places. We came upon a little bridge at one point. We were both a little confused about it, because we had been told there were no creeks in our area, yet there was a bridge. It wasn't a particularly old bridge either, but the creek bed under it was dry as a bone. Weird. We kept going because, why not, I guess? I'm not sure how far we walked beyond the bridge, but we ended up in a clearing with stones all around it in a circle. The clearing was big enough that there was a gap in the trees that allowed the sunlight in, and in the middle of the circle was a massive stone-walled well. It was big enough that there were stairs built into the dam wall in a huge spiral. My little friend was mesmerized by the well. She found a rock and tossed it in. We never heard it hit the bottom. As we were searching for more rocks to throw in, I was rooted around in the brush by the bigger stones and actually looked at the big ones. They were not normal stones. Nope. I was a smart cookie, already reading at 3rd grade level the summer before 1st grade, something that I loved to show off to anyone that would sit still for 3 seconds or more, so I could read the stupid stones. There were names and dates cut into the rough-hewn stones. We were in a graveyard, in the middle of the woods, far away from our adults. I remember getting chills realizing this. Moments later, my little friend got really quiet and poked me. She pointed to the edge of the clearing on the other side of the wall. Thankfully, not the side that we had entered the graveyard on. My little heart would have exploded, I think. She was pointing at a dark shape standing just inside the woods facing us. We both stood up very slowly and stared at this dark shape. At some point, the little girl took my hand and tried to get me to leave, but I couldn't move. The fear was paralyzing. I didn't move until the clouds covered the sun, and our bright, inviting clearing became slightly shadowy. Then, the shape moved. It was an adult-sized / shaped thing, wearing long dark robes with a hood over its face. We were stupid kids, but we weren't that stupid. We both turned tail and ran as fast as our little legs allowed. My friend was faster than me because I was a chunkier kid with a love of reading and movies and pizza, which leads to overweightness. Who would have thought it? So she made it to the bridge first. I wasn't far behind her though. I looked back after we got over the bridge, and that thing was standing at the edge of it, just standing there. I screamed, wet myself, and kept running. I tripped over a tree root in the path, ripping my pants and shredding my knee in the process. I scrambled up and kept running. We burst out the trees like our hair was on fire, screaming and crying, and made a beeline for the girl's grandparents' house. Her grandfather was in the backyard planting something and came running when he heard us. We were absolutely hysterical, and nothing could calm us down. We spent hours sobbing while the grandma and grandpa got us bathed and in clean clothes to try and soothe us. The more they said there was no one in the woods, the more hysterical we became. It took both of us months before we'd even go on the back deck again. Everyone was convinced we'd made up a story with our hyperactive imaginations, but the adults humored us. The kids, not so much. The next summer, we were forced into the backyard for the annual 4th of July party. Tons of kids. They all knew our story, and one of the teenage boys, a badass, don't you know, called BS and bullied us for hours until we told him where the path in the woods was. And then, he made us go with him. Cue another incident of me pissing my pants. Yay! To my utter relief, when we got there, she and I both remembered where the path was. There was nothing. No path. Just a very heavy growth of hemlock. He tried to wade through it and ended up with chiggers from neck to foot. And he got into a ton of trouble for dragging us kids down there once we got back. So she and I were relieved not to go back there. But from then on, all those kids thought we were stone cold liars. Fast forward 15 years later, 16 years after this all happened, my mum mentioned that the grandpa passed away a few months prior while I was off school. I was 22 at that point and had mostly forgotten the events in the woods. I expressed my condolences and asked what happened. I mean, this guy was a friend of my mum's for 20 plus years. My mum started being evasive, so I got curious and pressed her, and she said that he had hung himself in their garage. Jesus, wow, okay, that sucks. And then she told me the bad part. His granddaughter, my little friend, was the one that found his body. All around him were notebooks with crazy writings he had amassed over a very long time, some dating back to the early 70s apparently, detailing his dealings with demons and spirits and other crazy things. He had left notes for all of his loved ones. The note for his granddaughter was an apology for not protecting her from the demon at the well, and the note for his wife was an apology for leaving her, as it was the only way to protect her and the other people he loved. It seems that the explanation for their wealth was deals struck with the demons. After a few decades of these deals, they had started coming to collect on the debts the man owed, and what they wanted was for him to kill his family in payment. So, he killed himself instead. It was the craziest thing I'd ever heard, but it made total sense. Everyone wrote the guy off as having a serious mental health issue, threw the journals away, buried him, and moved on. No investigation, nothing. I can rationalize everything we saw and experienced to some kind of weird psychological reaction to picking hemlock. That wouldn't explain how both of us had the exact same delusion, though. I know what I saw was real. I might not remember all the details nearly 30 years after, but I do remember the fear, and I still have that scar on my knee that has never faded. I'm not afraid of the woods nor the dark, or anything like that, but I have a very healthy respect for the dead, and don't mess with demons and stuff. In the immortal words of Ducky, nope, nope, nope. When I was a child, I used to have the strangest dreams. I would find myself in a sun-drenched field playing ball with a 6-year-old African girl, her hair in twists, clad in a red and white checked gingham romper. Eventually, her dad, an enormous dusty farmer equipped with a pitchfork and leading a horse, would call her home. She would wave goodbye and I would seize awake. I had this dream several times, each time similar, with the difference being the game we played. Perhaps ball, maybe other times hunting for insects, or simply lazing around on the grass. I knew her name was Sarah. I knew her family worked on the land. Somehow, I knew the land. Then one night I had a lucid dream. I was in my bed asleep, and thought it was the middle of the night. Light streamed in though as if it were noon, and Sarah was by my bed, tugging my nightgown sleeve. She pleaded with me to get up, to play with her. So I sluggishly rose from my bed and followed her out my room and to the foot of the stairs leading to the spooky 3rd floor. I was suddenly leadened with dread, a feeling akin to seeing that particular look in my mother's eye before she told me my great-grandmother had died. Sarah whirled around, eyes inquisitive, her playful demands to come upstairs to play, honed by something sinister. Her father appeared at the top of the stairs, horse and all I could think of, this is ridiculous. How could a horse go up all those stairs? I told her I could not and would not come up and play, and she looked so sad at me. The saddest, oldest sad I'd ever seen. I woke up that morning asleep again at the foot of the stairs, with the deepest sadness I had ever felt. I never had the dream again. However, shortly thereafter the gardeners unearthed an old hitching post in the backyard. Many years later, I went for a hike across my street in search of an apocryphal graveyard, the oldest freed black cemetery in the north. I waded through the smallish swamp in my neighbor's yard and trudged up the hill to the area I had seen marked on an ancient map. There was the cemetery, invisible from the road with 15 or so headstones. While many were impossible to read and others fallen and broken, one stood out. Its memorial tree had grown around it, encasing the stone in the tree, shielding it from the elements. The body beneath was named Sarah. She had died at the age of 7 and had inhabited whatever structure existed where my house now stands. In March of this year, I became employed by a funeral home in my area as a student and funeral director's assistant. To paint the mental image, the funeral home is small and sits in the middle of a graveyard dating back to 1803. However, most of the graves there are not that old, and we still have plenty of space for future burials. The funeral home is cozy and inviting. It has a lot of natural light and is not creepy looking in the slightest. That being said, everyone who works there tells the same story. When alone in the funeral home, whether it be day or night, the sound of some unseen person walking around can be heard. I had not been told any strange happenings until I had an experience of my own and asked others about it the next day. I had been at the funeral home at around 2 a.m., preparing paperwork to go remove a descendant from the place of death and take them into our care, when I began hearing some weird noises coming from the common area, but at first brushed it off as the AC kicking on. However, the longer I was doing paperwork, the more distinctly it sounded like someone walking around. I knew that I had disarmed the alarm myself while coming in, so didn't really think anyone was there with me. But just to be sure, I got up, turned on my phone flashlight, and walked back there to make sure I was alone. Of course, I found nothing, but I thought it was really weird. Today I stayed later to work on a project for school that needed some of the funeral home's materials for it. It was around 4 p.m. I was packing up a few things in the office when I began to hear the walking again. I've heard it a few times by now, and after talking about it with other people who worked there, I'm getting used to it. I was never really scared. It was just unusual or odd. But today was different. After hearing the walking for a minute or two, I began to feel watched, like something was in the office with me, looking at me. I don't know if I was just more easily affected today, or if it's becoming aware that I can hear it. When I was about 15 years old, I was a very curious teenager. I had only heard stories of the Ouija board, but had never actually tried it. So one weekend, my best friend slept over, and we decided to take our chances. My mum was super against me buying one, and she would have killed me if I brought one into her house. So my best friend and I took a big poster board and made our own Ouija board. We lighted candles, turned off the lights, and at about 1 a.m., we tried it. Everyone in the house was asleep. When we started, it was slow, but the planchette started moving all across the board. I was convinced my best friend was the one moving the piece around, but she denied it, and I trusted her to not lie. We asked for a name, and they gave us Charlie. We asked their age, and they said 10, and we asked how they died, and they just said sick. After a bunch of other questions and scared skeptics, we asked how they could prove they were real, and who they said they were, and they responded with cemetery. I don't fully remember all the questions, but I know that it led to Charlie giving us some details. It was by a path and tree, small, around the year 1820. My mum's house is literally right across the street from the cemetery. I could look out the window and see directly into it. So we were very, very close. It is an extremely old historical colonial cemetery dating back to 1690. The next day, my best friend and I went over to the burial ground and started our wild goose chase for Charlie's headstone. Lo and behold, we found it, exactly as he described. His headstone was a cylinder shape. The name Charlie was listed, born 1810, died 1820. Behind the stone was a huge tree right next to a pathway. I could not believe the Ouija board actually worked. After discovering Charlie's grave, my best friend and I would visit him every day after school. We would just hang out there sometimes when we were bored. Sometimes, we would just sit next to him, smoke cigarettes and talk. Maybe Charlie was just lonely and wanted some friends. So, that's what we tried to give him. I was walking around the forest near my house with a friend, and we decided to cut off the path and see how deep we could get through the trees before they became too thick. Where I live is sort of mountainous, so it's pretty easy to walk among the trees without getting too caught up in branches. Everything is sort of spaced apart well. We walked for about an hour when we came to all these little arranged pebbles. They were all put in little circles of different sizes, and definitely put there intentionally. We kept walking and noticed that some of the circles also had crosses with them, some serious Blair Witch stuff. We really should have just left, but we just so happened to have taken some acid, and this was 100% not a hallucination, and everything was hilarious to us. Eventually we kept walking and found a sign that explained it was an animal cemetery, at which point we realized we had been walking over hundreds of buried animal corpses. We noped out of there as quickly as we could, but because we hadn't followed the path, it was quite confusing to go back, and took much longer to arrive home. If that wasn't bad enough, we came across the biggest pure white dog we've ever seen on the way back. There was no one else around but this massive dog with no leash and no collar, and obviously, in our drugged up state, we convinced ourselves it was the ghost. It followed us as we tried to find our way for 20 minutes, when finally its owner wandered out and found him. It was some old hippie man who just let the dog wander around. Turns out the dog was so big because it was part wolf. Really not too unusual for where I live. But like I said, we were on acid, so the whole thing was more of a trip than we were expecting. We tried to find the cemetery again when sober, but couldn't figure out where we had veered off the path. Definitely the weirdest trip, and the creepiest thing I've ever found in the woods. When I was younger, I was part of a youth organization of sorts. One volunteer thing we did was regularly mow and do maintenance on an old cemetery. No one had been buried there since the 80s, but once we took care of it, people started using it again. Keep in mind it's a really rural area. We're mowing and doing other stuff one day, and I was in high school at this point. It was near the end of the day, so most people had gathered by the gates. I was in the far corner, crouched down in tall grass, in part of the unused cemetery. I was going through an old pile of flowers, finding the years and years worth of plastic flowers that had been tossed away so that they could be disposed of properly. A few young kids come over and start playing in the tall grass. They are making their way towards me, and I could tell they hadn't seen me yet. When they got close, but still hadn't seen me, I said, "Stop walking on my grave." They instantly froze and looked around, and they took off sprinting so fast. One kid even started crying. Once my mum found out what I did, she was pissed, but I still thought it was hilarious. I went to this school for 4 years, and still live really close to it. The years I went to this school were the only years I had sleep paralysis. It was built on a graveyard. They moved the graveyard somewhere close by because the area wasn't big enough, so they moved it and made a school where it had been before. The bodies were not moved, because in our tradition, we don't bury the bodies within their coffins well dressed. We bury them with white fabric wrapped around them. They're naked, and this fabric is the only clothing they have. so it isn't really prudent to move the bodies. There were projections in every class. We were looking from Google, things like haunted places, possessed people, and scary paranormal stuff, almost every day. There were screams in our classroom sometimes, with no one behind them. The girls were really scared by these. Another day, someone found some writing on a board. It said sleep paralysis demon, and then it had my name and a few other personal and identifying details. On other times, the lights would start to fade, turn themselves on again, and then stop working completely. This happened just when the projection started to show the images, and then we learnt that part of the light was the lighting exploding. Since we were looking at this kind of stuff in school, like ghosts and stuff, it's predictable, but we were also apparently summoning jinns. Basically, they are creatures that Muslims believe in, that live in the same world as ours, but we can't see them, but they can see us. They're like spirits, I believe. One day we tried to summon a jinn when something strange happened. Some of us who joined in the summoning went to the graveyard on a lunch break. A girl in class accidentally stepped on one of the graves and was so scared when she realized another girl, her friend, had something weird on her neck that wasn't there before. When we realized and told her, she began to cry for a long time. Everyone was very scared. We thought it was a joke at first, but the seriousness and intensity of her crying made us realize it wasn't, and I don't think those cries would be jokes. Her neck had what appeared to be the letters R and T scratched onto their surface and vanished the next day. We never spoke about that again. Another girl in our class was really interested in the paranormal. And said that it probably meant Spirit of God, and this scared everyone even more, as in our language the first two letters would be RT. Now, I need to say something everyone believes here. According to them, the street of the school is where you can see the light of someone that died, who was someone God loved so much. So now he is being a light to people in the street. The street also includes the new grave. When I was little, I remember being with my family passing from another street that also crosses that street. When I see a light, not a street light, an independent orb of light floating. But I was really little, so perhaps I was confused. In any case, this final story is from when my grandma went to my school working as someone who cleans. This was the first few years after the school was made. She told me that the principal cared about her opinion a lot, which was making another woman working there very jealous, when all of a sudden the principal started to act not so nice to her. Months, maybe even years later, when they were cleaning the principal's office, she claimed she found a paper that had Arabic letters on it. Then she got the paper, got rid of it, and the principal started to act nice to her again. So basically, my grandma assumes the other woman who worked there cast a spell on him so he would like my grandma less. Growing up, my family frequently traveled to rural Mexico. Almost everyone there believes in supernatural things and are very superstitious. I am honestly a skeptic in many things, but I did see a few things that I can't explain. This is one of them. Light orbs. Growing up, I heard many stories of strange light orbs. Everyone believes they're witches. One of my uncles, who was a retired soldier, woke up one night as usual to feed his sheep at 6 a.m. He said he saw a big orb fly above his barn. He watched it for a few minutes and decided the best thing to do was shoot at it with a rifle. He says this was a Vietnam-era M4. He fired a few shots and saw they hit the orb, which was spinning like crazy, and it charged towards him as he ran inside his house. He waited all day and night inside. He believes it was a witch. I loved that story as a child, but thought it was a lie until I got to see them. In Mexico, it is common for teenagers to go to parties to the next town over. One of my cousins had a truck, and it would get filled inside the cab and on the bed. There would be maybe 12 of us on our way back at around 1 a.m. I was riding in the back of the truck, and I was tired, so I wasn't paying attention to my surroundings until the truck stopped. Someone inside pointed at a small hill which had a cemetery on top. There they were, 3 orbs around the cemetery, circling about 20 feet above it. They had to be about the size of a Volkswagen Beetle. We were about half a mile away and just stared at them for about 3 minutes. They would circle the cemetery, dropped to the tombs and went back up. Then all of a sudden, they just went up and didn't want to come back down. I have to admit, I was yelling at my cousin to go. I was afraid I didn't want to die at a glowing orb. My friend and I decided to go on a late-night drive to find this creepy cemetery one night. Great start to a story, I know, but we were bored and in a small town with nothing else to do. After close to 40 minutes of driving, we got to the state park. Now typically, parks are closed after dark, but these roads were still public access, so they weren't off limits to general drivers. However, we were the only cars on the road at this point, and it was isolated, we thought. The lanes were surrounded by thick trees, and it was dark. No streetlight dark. We're on a narrow dirt lane looking for this cemetery, but we drive by it, unknowingly. The area we were driving through was kind of like a square of roads with only one way in and out. We get to the crossroads, where the road we are on goes straight through, or you can continue back through by a left-only turn. Next to the ditch across the road from us, we see a dark green sedan pulled into the brush, no lights on, no people around it, not an accident from all we could tell. Whatever, kind of weird, but we slowly turned left and began to loop back around looking for the small rows of old headstones again. As we get back around the intersection about 5 minutes later, the green sedan is still pulled off in the bushes. But now, it's not the only vehicle there. There's a big pickup truck, idling in the dark across from us, blocking the straightaway. Now, it had to have come from the other direction since no other cars passed us or were in front of us or behind us. That was the way we had planned to go, to leave the park since we hadn't found what we were looking for, but we couldn't pass through. This truck was in the middle of the road, taking up all the space on either side. At first, we were thinking, this guy's pal probably got his car stuck and called for help. Then this truck guy turns on his headlights, his high beams, and starts revving his engine hard. My friend and I exchange looks, like wondering who's overcompensating for something, and when we turn back, trying to see through the blinding light, we see a silhouette of a big, bulky man. He's standing in front of the truck, hands on his hips, just standing there. We aren't a car's length and a half away from this guy, and there's nowhere to go but left, which we know just leads us back around to the same place. We sit staring at each other for a few moments, trying to decide what to do. My friend starts pulling the car forward at a snail pace, trying to keep as much distance between us and this truck as possible, and we make the left turn. He's just standing there, not moving, looking in our direction. We weren't scared yet, really, but I'm a bit paranoid generally, so I was waiting for him to lunge at the car, throw something at us or something. I don't know, it just really felt off. After we turn, I check the rear view and see the guy holding something as he takes a few steps behind our car in the outline of the light. It's long, barrel-shaped and threatening looking. We peel out of there now, wanting to put distance between us, but forgetting we are stuck in this square of roads. When we get back to about halfway, we begin to see the start of the straightaway in the truck, whose headlights we can still see. We pull off to the side of the road, trying to figure out how we can exactly get out of this situation. I look out the window and see that we are sitting right next to the cemetery we had been looking for, but we are both too freaked to get out now, and we laugh at the irony for a second. Then we see headlights coming from behind us. It's the guy, and it gets closer. We see it's a white SUV, and it slows next to our car. The window rolls down, and it's a car full of guys our age. "What are you guys up to out here?" the driver says. "We're just here for a drive." And they say some stuff out of earshot. My friends and I don't have a strong, menacing aura, so we hoped we could just send some chill vibes and have them leave us off the hook for whatever was going on. Were they with the truck guy? Because this wasn't truck guy, but was all too weird. We asked if they'd seen a truck ahead, where they had to have driven in, but they said that they hadn't. When we looked back, we noticed the lights from the oncoming direction were gone. They laugh and pull away slowly, telling us to have a good night, and we pull back onto the road and take off for the exit, only looking out the windows long enough to notice that only the sedan was still there. "Sorry, buddy. Hope your car's alright." We made it back to his parents' place without further incident and told them about the encounter, but we couldn't explain what had happened really. It still kind of sounds stupid when I write it out, but something was going on. I've always been interested in the paranormal from a young age, and was super into looking up things near me that were haunted. I found an old website as a kid that I, to this day, visit on occasion, as it has a massive listing of every city in every US state and different encounters in the area around them. These encounters are usually pretty low-key, but it's fun to read up on. I remember reading about a small, roughly 10-stone graveyard in the woods about 2 miles away from my house. I even looked it up years ago when I heard about it on Google Maps, and actually saw a very small opening in the woods where it was mentioned. I had always wanted to go and see if it was truly there, and I was just a bit too scared of going, because it was said to have headstones from the 1800s, along with whispers and energies inside. However, one day, a friend and I decided to take the chance and go searching. We went out to the woods that was in question and looked around for any proper way in. To the left of the woods was a preschool with the title of something like Little Angels. We never thought anything of it, but tried to see if the parking lot had any way to give into the woods. We found a slight dirt path off the lot and went up into the woods, but ran into a gate blocking us further from going in. The gate seemed as though there was nothing deeper beyond it, just more woods, so we quit fairly easily, as we were being bitten by bugs. Fast forward a few years and a few more friends and I decide to go back and check it out again. This time the gate was open. We go beyond it and actually find the cemetery. Surprisingly enough, it had a sign at the start of it that looked fairly updated. Yet like the posting said, there were only about 15 stones in it. They were really old, some barely legible. It was kind of crazy to see such an old cemetery that was used at some point. We never encountered anything at all, but it was interesting to visit nonetheless. I think the thing that stood out to me the most, though, was something that I didn't notice until later. The Little Angels preschool that was built right next to this cemetery from the early 1800s had their phone number in huge numbers on the front of the building. The last 3 digits was 666. I found that quite creepy. although it's probably nothing too interesting, as we didn't notice anything happen to us. Still feel like it was a crazy coincidence, the placement and everything. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. I do dearly hope you have enjoyed tonight's stories. You know, I used to live not too far from a cemetery, back when I lived in London. It was actually really nice. Not very big, but it was nice to just walk around, spend a lot of time in there with my wife, just having picnics occasionally, especially as she worked opposite. So yeah, cemeteries aren't all that bad. Have any of you had any creepy experiences? Because if you have, I would love to hear about them. Be sure to email them over to me or post them to my Reddit pages. The links can be found in the description. And if you would like your name at the end of the video, as these lovely souls do already, you can pledge a small amount of money every month to my Patreon or my membership on YouTube. And if you want to just throw money at me because you want to, you can check out my Ko-fi, which I promise I will start updating regularly too. Full of promises. Alright then guys, take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.